Hello Internet, and welcome to a particularly spooky episode of Junk Film Review. In this series we'll be digging through the cinematic graveyard, uncovering all kinds of forgotten disasters and movie cadavers in the hope of finding at least something to laugh at. I can't remember a time in my life where I wasn't completely sleep deprived. Since a very early age I've spent sleepless nights hiding under my duvet like a little bitch. Just kidding, I was actually hiding under my duvet playing Pokemon like a little bitch, with a flashlight precariously balanced on my chest or painfully clenched between my teeth. Because Playtendo screens weren't backlit in those days, and nothing was going to stop me from becoming the very best like no one ever was, including the overwhelming natural urge to become unconscious when it's dark outside. I was the proud owner and completer of Pokemon's Blue, Yellow and Gold, and would stay awake for as long as my brain would allow before it performed an emergency shutdown, rendering me immediately and uncomfortably unconscious, and leaving my Playtendo beeping and blooping away at the faintest of volumes until it slowly passed away in the early hours of the morning. Much to the dismay of my father, who couldn't for the life of him understand how my batteries kept dying so quickly. Which rapidly led to the introduction of bumper packs of budget-assed batteries. Maybe these will dissuade the insatiable hunger of my handheld gaming console.
Feed me more batteries.
This was the first reason I subscribed to a life of sleeplessness, and began the onset of irritability which would undoubtedly lead to my unapproachable and grouchy attitude towards life and the people in it, until a few years later when I was gifted with my very own television. Which was probably a direct result of my perpetual nagging, but I honestly can't remember. And therefore, the next reason to not sleep was discovered. Too great was the allure of odd but curious late-night programming such as South Park, Ren and Stimpy, The Tom Green Show, Eurotrash and Banzai. All of which would help to establish the foundations of my gross and nihilistic sense of humour. I also once stayed up past 5 AM watching the BBC Learning Zone on conversational Japanese. Not entirely relevant, but I just want to illustrate how little was necessary for me to avoid getting the essential rest my body requires to function.
I can say domo arigato.
It was commonplace back then for the latter hours of the television schedule to be filled with the aforementioned programmes, alongside bizarre independent low-budget productions, softcore pornography, and cheaply made and badly acted B-movies. It was at about this time that I acquired another token of sleeplessness, and that was when I discovered the first and possibly last movie to ever truly scare me. Dr. Giggles. I was uncategorically mortified after seeing this movie as a child, which actually made this repeat viewing even funnier. This movie is already so terrible that it's actually hilarious, but returning to it after all these years with a critical mind, I found so much more enjoyment in it. From the extremely elaborate and distracting sound design... What the fuck? To the appalling dialogue, which consists almost entirely of weak doctor-related puns.
Leave it in for at least a minute.
To the awful plot, which is so full of holes that I'd sooner refer to it as a hole with some bits of plot in it. So the premise is relatively simple. After residing in a psychiatric institute for decades, a homicidal maniac somehow gets a hold of power tools and overthrows the place, putting on a show for the other inmates by performing some emergency surgery on a staff member. Apparently he's some kind of doctor, and although he's never presented any of the relevant paperwork, I think it's safe to assume that he knows what he's doing. He has absolutely no problem removing this man's arms for medical reasons, and decides he's about ready to take his practice to the public. I remember the initial shock after this scene. I turned the television off and lay there in the dark for a few minutes, unsure how to carry on with my life now that I'd seen someone have their organs and arms removed. I'd not really seen any depictions of physical violence before, apart from the really intense fight scenes in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and the most extreme gore I'd been subject to was in a demo I had of Resident Evil 2. But despite its warnings and certification, the red pixelated blood in that game didn't really offer much in the way of detail, and so, as you may have well ascertained by now, I was not prepared for this ridiculous gorefest, and it scared the absolute shit out of me.
That movie has warped my fragile little mind.
As I lay there terrified, my curiosity eventually got the better of me, and I turned the movie back on, sitting there uncomfortably close to the screen with the volume on 1 so no one else could hear. And so the Doctor flees the Institute, sneakily evading security by violently murdering everyone he comes into contact with. He quickly and cleverly enacts a plan to avoid recapture by returning to his own house in his hometown, where he was originally from. And it's a resounding success, as nobody comes there looking for him. How is that not the first place they'd look? We're then introduced to a small cast of disposable teenagers, the perfect fodder for any slasher movie, and as you've already guessed, they're all extremely shallow, one-dimensional interpretations of human beings, and all share the same single agenda: party and get laid. Odd that they cast a selection of actors who look closer to 30 than they do to their teens, but there's nothing a backwards baseball cap and some terrible dialogue can't fix.
I hope you two can breathe through your ears.
Have you heard of nostrils?
Yeah, as long as you don't plug them up.
What?
First time I've ever been accused of talking too much.
What? Am I missing something here? None of that exchange makes any sense. Does the person who wrote this dialogue even have a face? Or understand anything about anatomy? And if you think I'm cherry picking, I'm not. 90% of the dialogue in this movie is completely disjointed bullshit and serves absolutely zero purpose. And the most frustrating thing about it is that all this pointless dialogue in these external scenes is overlaid with horrible ADR.
Maybe it's time for the famous Max Anderson stress test.
For the uninitiated, ADR stands for Automated Dialogue Replacement, and it's used when the original audio recording isn't good enough, sometimes due to interference, loud environmental noises, or just a shitty sound recordist who doesn't use the correct equipment. And so the actors are called into a studio to re-record their dialogue, and it's played back over the top of the video. It's been done to moderate success in the past, but it's always startlingly obvious to me, especially in movies like this where no real care has been taken to match up the mouth movements and the new dialogue. Jen gives us a quick tour of the area surrounding her house, and then nips in for a little bit of clunky exposition with her father, and mid-conversation literally pulls an apple out of nowhere.
I thought dinner was almost ready.
You know what they say, an apple a day keeps the doctor away.
For sake. They literally just wanted to shoehorn in that expression, so they had a character pull an apple out of their ass just so they can say that line. Wow. This is followed by some extremely vague and sloppily hashed together backstory about Jen's real mother, leaving or dying or something. I don't care. Back at Casa Giggles, we're treated to a flashback revealing some of the Doctor's early life, in which he spent his time mutilating teddy bears unquestioned and expressing his lifelong intentions without ever being prompted by anyone.
Daddy, I want to be a doctor just like you.
Ugh. Why is the dialogue so cringeworthy in this movie? Current day Dr. Giggles then comes to the conclusion that his hometown is now sick and needs to be cured. And what better way to cure an entire town of its imaginary illness than to go around forcibly removing everyone's organs? How brilliantly fortunate that this is his area of expertise. It's at this precise moment that our gang of 30-year-old teenagers rock up to the horrible house for a bit of courting. When the two males' feeble attempts to sexually coerce their female counterparts in this lovely setting doesn't quite go as they'd planned, they both try different tacts. Bill S. Preston Esquire decides to whisk his lover off to a new location, perhaps somewhere where they can lay down without getting tetanus. Meanwhile, Sanka goes for more of a sympathy angle and decides to be brutally murdered in front of his love interest by lethal injection, leaving her in the caring and capable hands of our heartthrob doctor. All of the commotion alerts the neighbour, Mrs. Poodle, who goes over to investigate. At night. So either she was listening to screaming all day and finally gave in to go and have a look, or she just sat on it for a bit and walked over at the most dangerous possible opportunity. The latter of which is extremely odd behaviour for someone who is terrified of absolutely everything. Mrs. Poodle returns home to inform the authorities, and rather than taking the nice red pill that keeps her alive, she accidentally takes a blue pill which makes her die instead. Medicine! Luckily the doctor is on hand to give her a quick checkup.
I think I found the problem.
Her dog is so startled by this that she runs through a portal which leads into a different time zone, where it's daylight outside again. And is never seen nor mentioned again in the entire film. Where did the dog go? What universe did the dog travel to? Responding to Mrs. Poodle's call, the police visit the entirely vandalised house, full of broken furniture, rubble, cobwebs, smashed glass, torn books, discarded possessions and graffiti, and one of the police officers' attention is baselessly drawn to a single scrap of cloth snagged on a screw in the wall, which coincidentally has some indicative markings on it. What what great fortune that the single piece of detritus he chooses to focus his attention on amongst this wealth of sullied and destroyed items happens to be the one and only thing which would help him piece together what's happening in the movie. It's almost as if he's in a conveniently written story or something. It's also quite puzzling that this key piece of evidence appears later in the movie, but is much neater and easier to read for some reason. Back at home, Bill S. Preston Esquire has another dig at creating a seductive atmosphere, and suggests that his girlfriend wears his mother's sexy underwear? It isn't clear what sort of relationship Bill here has with his mother, but I can't imagine the kind of person who would A, go rifling through his mother's underwear drawers, and B, find items in there and think, whoa, yeah, I can't wait to slap this lot on my 40-year-old teenage girlfriend. That'll really set the mood. Completely unfazed by this bizarre request, little Miss slips into his mum's soggy underwear. Meanwhile, Bill goes into the bathroom to clumsily fumble with his rubber above the open toilet bowl. Who does this? He doesn't even have an erection. What was he going to do? Thumb his flaccid cock into it and hope for the best? Things are really starting to heat up, so it's lucky that the doctor has stopped by to take little Miss's temperature. And then he decides to help Bill practice safe sex by removing his penis. The doctor then proceeds to make his way around the neighbourhood, curing everybody in increasingly elaborate and unrealistic ways, except for this young boy who he diagnoses with a terminal case of playing video games.
Terminal.
Whilst snooping around inside Jen's house, he finds her medical reports and self-help books and discovers that she has a heart condition, causing him to have another bizarre flashback. The young Giggles and his father are seen mourning over his mother, who apparently died of a heart condition, despite the fact that the actress in this scene is clearly still breathing. Perhaps they should have got a second opinion. Freshly imbued with sympathy, the doctor sets his focus on finding Jen, so he can help her avoid the same fate as his beloved mother. The funfair is in town, and everyone who hasn't died yet has turned up for the evening. Even Jen, who's stood all alone because her boyfriend Max is at a strange orgy in the nearby band room. He's decided to take some time out to teach this girl how to correctly apply her mouth to a saxophone. Traditional teaching methods don't appear to be working for her, so instead he attempts to instruct her mouth with his mouth, and at this precise moment Jen walks in. Oh no, what a terrible misunderstanding. Jen flees in tears and is spotted by the doctor, who's brought along a full-size framed photograph to help identify her more easily. Why did he bring the frame? She runs into a hall of mirrors with Max and Mouth Girl in pursuit. The filmmakers then decided to include a shot of Mouth Girl walking into what is clearly a perspex wall. But then decide to immediately contradict this by having Jen bump into the doctor and dramatically fall through an extremely weak pane of glass. She scrambles away, terrified, and is finally found by Max, who hasn't witnessed anything and has no idea what's going on. And so, naturally, his immediate reaction to seeing the doctor for the first time in the entire story is to scream at Jen to run and escape. Why? Jen manages to evade the doctor by flopping out of the Hall of Mirrors, ragdolling down a hill, and getting hit by a police car. Back at the station, the police take statements from the couple. This is where the plot just falls apart. No dead bodies have been found, no crimes have been reported nor witnessed by anyone who's still alive. Jen and Max hadn't seen the doctor at all before the Hall of Mirrors, and have no reason to fear him or run from him, but they're manically trying to convince the police chief to do something about what? And he can't even figure out how to use his chopsticks, never mind trying to piece together the incoherent narrative of this bullshit movie. Rather than find some interesting way to reveal the true backstory, it's just delivered in the most lazy way possible. The old fart cop sits down and recounts the entire thing. Late one night, this officer went down to the mortuary where all of the corpses were being kept, and a young Dr. Giggles, who has presumably been laying completely still and holding his breath for hours, carves his way out of a dead woman's torso. Then the police officer conveniently loses consciousness, so the scriptwriter can avoid explaining the rest of the story. This makes less than no sense. How did he get in there? How did he breathe? What the f***? With no actual crime to solve, or any other form of motivation apart from the clearly ridiculous story recounted by his alcoholic partner, the police officer leaves to go and investigate further, which is exactly when Dr. Giggles strikes, killing Jen's real doctor and kidnapping her, taking her to his private practice in his dingy basement and preparing her for surgery. The police officer very cleverly manages to piece together all of the clue and makes his way back over to the very obviously spooky house, breaking into the basement to discover a waiting room filled with the doctor's victims, some of whom are clearly still breathing and blinking, but let's not worry about that. And now for the epic final showdown between Dr. Giggles and the townsfolk of Moor High. Well, sort of. The final tussle is extremely confusing, disorienting, and pretty terribly choreographed. It features people being hit with golf clubs through panes of glass, but being okay, a gun which is loaded with a single bullet and somehow fired 4 times, an extremely pathetic stair collapse, and a set piece shamelessly stolen from Die Hard. All culminating in a very dramatic and conveniently timed explosion which engulfs the Doctor. Now everyone can relax as they're taken away to the hospital for some after-movie treatment. Oh no, the Doctor isn't dead. Better finish him off by not understanding how a defibrillator works. Defibrillator pedals have to charge up to an effective wattage, which is then released in a short, sharp burst. The whole point is to attempt to induce a sudden heartbeat. This equipment cannot produce a constant current, it's impossible. And so, Dr. Giggles is dead. Jen can finally— oh no, wait, the Doctor isn't dead. And he's dead again. Want to stamp on his head or cut him into pieces? You know, make sure this time? No? Okay. Hooray! Hooray! Now everything is back to normal. So back to normal that Jen has apparently forgotten Max cheated on her. So I guess the moral of the story is you can cheat on someone as long as the person you cheat with gets their organs removed afterwards or something. I don't know why I'm trying to look for some kind of moral or meaning. This movie doesn't even deserve to go back in the bin. It's clearly very sick and will need curing. What was the first movie to ever scare you? Drop it in the comments so we can all laugh at how much of a wimp you are. And if you liked this video and thought it was funny, please share it with a friend, because then they'll like you and think that you're funny. And if you've watched this far and you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. Thanks. Just a quick shout out to my patrons. Thank you so much for your generosity. You guys are the best. Also, huge shout out to the very talented Cynical Reviews. This lovely chap said some very kind things about me on his channel, which was instrumental in me achieving 1,000 subscribers. Also, I received my first piece of fan art, which is absolutely insane. Big thanks to Broken Grin, links to his shit below. He was kind enough to take the time to draw a funny picture of me, which is just awesome. Yeah, thanks for watching. I've got loads of videos planned, some scripts ready to go, and a stack of awful films to try and live through, so I'm going to get back to work. See you in the next one.